Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The Process, where we get real, raw, and grounded. You guys already know who I am, and also my fellow co-host. And as you've noticed, today we have two other guests who've been on the show before. We have Mr. Dave Barton and Mr. JD Daley. Today's episode is going to be a longer one than our usual 30 minute or so. We're going to have a conversation about mental health. And the reason why I've invited Dave and JD back is because they've been very open about their mental health stuff on socials with their content for quite a while. As Wesley and I have been on this show, it's an important conversation to have, especially and especially for men. We don't get enough of that, and so I've brought us here together to start that conversation. And so, everyone's going to tell their story, what they've gone through, what works for them, that kind of a thing. And, we're going to go down some rabbit holes, and that's okay. That's part of the process, pun intended, as always. And I want to open it up with just something as of late that I've been dealing with, and it's well, I've mentioned it before on the show, and I bring up this philosopher named Camus, right? And he wrote this essay called The Myth of Sisyphus. And when he talks about suicide and the absurdity of life and finding meaning in things. And as I've talked about on the show before, this year has been one of the more trying years for me, right? It's brought up a lot. And that's the thing. When you're struggling with shit, it brings up a lot into question. Who you are. Is it worth what you're doing? Why continue this pursuit? Oh my God, I'm fucking failing. I'm this, I'm that, right? The stories that come up. Why don't I just fucking end it? That kind of a thing. And there's always this point where I get to where I'm like, okay, and this is something that I've picked up with JD when working with him. This whole idea of like, fuck, that sucks. Now what? Some other things that I do for myself. As many of you know, I'm big into physical training and also meditation. But then something that I experienced earlier this year when I got injured, that physical training portion got taken away from me. And all that I was left was with the tools that I have internally and what can I do with that? And then I think about the whys in my life and ultimately my son, my family, and what I want to do in the future. And why do I keep doing what I do? So with that being said, gentlemen, I want to open up the floor to this discussion. So anyone chime in?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that came up, it's kind of two things. One, fucked up thoughts. If you expect not to have fucked up thoughts, I can't imagine that. We don't control our thoughts. One thing that's been really helpful for me is separating the distance between thoughts and thinking. Someone cuts me off in traffic, right? A thought might pop in and like, I'm going to kill that bastard.
Yeah.
Does that make me a murderer? No, of course not. So one, it's being able to accept that I am going to have a bunch of thoughts. There's, millions of little bits of information going through my head. I think it was like 11 million bits of information are being absorbed, and you can absorb at any given time, and you can really absorb and process 40. There's access. There's symbolism. There's a lot of things in my mind that I don't know how it works, right? And those come through in thoughts. I have to be able to disconnect I am not my thoughts. But with practice and with discipline, I can control my thinking. And I think there's a big difference there that's allowed me to gain control and to rewrite the ship, in that I can't control that thought. It's there. I have had those thoughts, right? Might as well just end it, right? That thought has popped up. These intrusive things come through my mind at all times, right? Especially because of what I went through later on in my life. I have to take control of the process in which I guide the thinking. Now, easier fucking said than done, right? It's like, okay, end the podcast. We're good now. Thanks, JD.
So like everyone go home.
Right. Right. But what really made me think about it here is typically what happens is we start asking ourselves questions. Why is this happening to me? Why do I always do this? Why am I so fucking stupid? Why this? Why that? Right. And you have to be very careful with the questions that you ask yourself, because you will find answers to every single one. If there is no answer, your brain will create an answer. Well, you do this because of this. You're fat because of this. You're this because of that. Because you're no good because of it. And so all of a sudden now the thoughts turn into a thinking pattern, and you're looking for evidence to back the thought. It's a very difficult process. But one thing I ask myself when I go through, right, and I ask those same stupid questions that everybody asks, right, but then I stop myself and I ask myself, are those the answers I'm looking for? Do I want to find out why I'm so fucking stupid? Because there's lots of evidence in there, but is that the answer I want? What do I do with that information? Why does this always happen to me? Those questions I don't want the answer to. So that is the entry point that I get in and say, well, I can't do anything with those answers anyway. Right? So interjecting, and that's the now what, right? I'll explain quickly why I like fuck that sucks now what, where it came from, right? I realized that we all have a cycle, right? I'm not talking about a menstrual cycle, but we all have a cycle, right? We all kind of go through these figure eight of emotions. And what I realized was I was looping, right? I go through anger and sadness and anger and sadness. And I realized my trigger point was frustration. When I got frustrated, right, then I can't stay there. Frustration is a weird point to stay, right? So it has to escalate. So what do? I look for more things that are going wrong, more people that aren't meeting up, what's wrong with people, how greedy they are, right? And then I escalate to anger. You can't stay in anger because it's very energy exerting, right? So then you start to look at the hopelessness and what you can't change and the desperation and how it's not going to be any different and why even try, right? And I first brought to awareness that cycle. And I also tracked the timeline. And I realized it was about a 2-week timeline. I'm like, well, I don't know the answer to this, but what if I just tighten this up? Because eventually I found myself out of it. And then I would rise up and then I would have some good times and then I'd fall back in that cycle again. And so the first thing wasn't, and this is, my message is, the first thing is not to eliminate thoughts. It's not to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not to never fall down. Again, these unreal expectations do more harm than good. My thought is, how can I limit the amount of downtime I have? If I'm down for a day instead of 2 weeks, that adds up over time, right? So it was almost a harm reduction strategy, right? And so I thought, okay, what's the cycle, right? Well, the cycle is that anger and frustration, right? And then this kind of sad hopelessness, right? Little pity party. So I'm like, okay, well, what is the shortest version of this anger? One of my favorite words, and I think it works so well, is fuck. It says so much, right? When you express that, right, I can express all my anger, all that resentment, all that buildup in one word, one 4-letter word. Everything else is kind of redundant, right? I need to express that anger. I need to get it out. I need to not have it bottled up inside. So that's where fuck came from. Okay, great. It's expressed. Anything else is kind of wasteful, right? Now the pity party. How can I tighten up that pity party, right? And really feel the disappointment and all of those emotions, because especially for men, it's difficult sometimes for us to feel those emotions and allow and give permission to feel those emotions. So I thought, well, that sucks is kind of the summary. If I had to take that whole week of downtime, it's that sucks. Anything beyond that is kind of redundant. And so what that did is I just condensed. I didn't allow myself to just be Mr. Brightside, right? Or ignore the things or just like tackle it head on. I allowed myself those expressions, but I just condensed the time. Fuck, that sucks. And then what Marco talked about, which is bringing this all together after my long rant, right, is now what allows me to start controlling the questions that I'm asking myself. I don't need to always diagnose how bad everything is and understand it deeply. Some things are a mystery. Some things I'll never know. And even if I had the answer, I don't know what to do with it. But now what allows me to focus on the next step in moving forward? So that's where that all comes from. And that was a harm reduction plan to tighten up, right? Of like these things, especially with what I deal with, they hit me periodically and they come quite often, right? I find myself down quite often and I don't know how to get rid of that. So it was, how can I limit the impact and the extension of how much time I'm in that place?
Yeah.
I want to let Dave chime in there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. First of all, with JD, you've got such a good cadence, and just I kind of forgot I was involved in this, and I was just listening. I was just in the zone, man. But I think for me, what I would love to do is take one step before that as well, because although that seems like a really simple process for me and in my journey up until very recently, that would actually be quite advanced for me to be able to conceive. Because I think there's two parts that I would like to talk about. One is an interesting dichotomy between the fact that not one thing that I had to realize, not everyone has the thoughts that I do going through my head. And at the same time, there's enough people having those thoughts as well that I'm not alone, right? It was like a two-parter for me, because I used to watch people. I mean, I've done Tony Robbins, I've walked on the fire, I've done all the good stuff, right? But it never lasted. And one of the things that I struggled with was everybody must be feeling what I'm feeling, but they're succeeding with it anyway. And half of my journey has been understanding, without too many labels and all that sort of stuff, but understanding things like ADHD and all that. And I realized, oh, actually, some of these people aren't even having that. So it's like I was already comparing something that didn't matter. But then what it actually did was it made me feel not alone, because I was like, oh, there is other people feeling exactly what I'm feeling. And I think, first of all, for men, I want to speak about men specifically, because that's what I am. Last time I checked. And it's more for me, what I felt was shame. And I think this is, I made a post about it the other day, and I think if I only discovered it was shame this week, right? But when I look back, it's like that was what it was throughout most of my life. And it was that shame, simple things of, if anyone would have summed up my life growing up, it's like, oh, he has so much potential, right? Like that's a dagger in it, because you means you haven't done what you needed to do, and things like that. And I think the mental health side, what we do is we have all these thoughts, we think we're alone, we don't think anyone else understands what we're going through. We then think we should be doing better because we see all these other people who may or may not be dealing with it doing better. And then we start that shame cycle and we start to go down. And for me, I've been in that period for a majority of my life. So when it came to how do I deal with this, and I've been asked that, and I was like, actually, I don't know. Like sometimes it's a miracle I'm here. Like I don't. It's not like sometimes it's not like, oh, I dealt with this, and I thought, sometimes I'm just like, I kind of got here just because I didn't make a decision, more so than anything else. And I think it's just, for me, that would be the first thing I want to speak to. I want to speak to people who are at that stage where they can't even think of coming out of it yet. And what I want to say to those is, you're not alone. the shame you're feeling, the things that are holding you back, the things that are there, it is worth exploring and understanding and kind of trying to figure out where things are going, not for an excuse, but also just to realize that there is something afterwards. And I think that's one of the hardest things to feel. And that's why I think a lot of times there's that ultimate decision that we can make that means I don't have to think about this anymore because we can't see the other side of it. And it's such a cliche to say there is another side, but that's the first people I want to talk to. I know that. I know that place. I've lived that place. I'm still in that place here and now. It's not saying that that disappears. It's not saying that there's a cure and a miracle for that. What it is saying is like, this is there's so much more to what you think there is. It's not about getting rid of those thoughts. It's about understanding yourself and where that leads. And it's still a journey for me. Not we've already said on this, right? We're not claiming to answer these questions. We're the fact that we're airing them is more important for me because it means other people who are even questioning this can go, okay, there's other people questioning this as well. So that's the one thing I wanted to touch on. The other thing, which has been really interesting for me, and I'm jumping around, and I'm sure we'll go down loads of different holes on this, but when JD, when you talked about putting a block between the thought and then the action, or however you phrased it, but that thing, I'll be fully honest, I've only recently started on ADHD meds, right? It was a big journey for me to get to that point. And what was really interesting for me, that sort of statement, I understood, like I get it, and it makes sense. It's a very literal thing, and my brain works very literally. I'm like, okay, this. But for me, there was never a space, there was never a gap where that even existed. And I think a lot of people live in this world. When I had the meds, suddenly there's a gap. And this was the weirdest distinction for me. And again, it's not to cause an excuse, not at all, but it's to help people see different ways of viewing the world. Because the best description or the simplest description of ADHD I ever heard was, I think his name is Dr. Barkley. And he said, if you had the two parts of your brain, if we simplified it down, you have information and you have action. ADHD breaks the two apart. So you can keep getting information, but you'll never take action. Taking the meds has put a bridge. And it's really weird because now when you say that, I actually understand what you mean. But a month ago, I didn't know how to put a gap. So I think that's another thing as well, is it is about finding tools. I'm not saying drugs are the way, right? But it is about finding tools as well. And it's worth looking for those tools because when you find the right tool, suddenly you can actually explore the world in a totally different way. And that's been mind blowing to me, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I think that's incredible, and I'm really glad you went in that direction because just where we started, right, is kind of the 18 years in the making, and it's like, oh, here's a tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
But again, easier said than done, and it didn't start. That was, there was sometimes, I mean, at my worst, that was 6 months in a gutter, right? And I didn't have these tools, and I didn't have these, and it was what I really liked about what you said is it's not taking the final destination and working backwards, right? It's an exploration and a discovery, right? And being able to say that doesn't resonate with me, it's okay, well, that's, if we can interject even a little bit of curiosity of like, why doesn't that fit, right? And a little bit of imagination of maybe there's something different about my journey, and maybe what I'm saying doesn't resonate with someone that's talking, and maybe Dave's journey or Wesley's journey or Marco, like, this is a bunch of people. We're flawed at our core. We have our own experience, and this is our flavor. This is what has worked for us, but not to negate that this is not something I figured out in 5 minutes. I went down to the depths, right? I hit rock bottom. I did everything wrong first, right? I lost hope. It wasn't like, okay, let's tackle this. I'm going to figure out a little 3-part system, right? It was through trial and error and all of these things of finding kind of what works. And again, that's why I really like the idea of harm reduction. before it was a 2-minute process, it started with, how can I not hurt myself as much? How can I not self-destruct as much? How can I catch it a little bit sooner? How can I talk to someone a little bit sooner? Oh, I haven't had a shower for 5 days. How could I maybe shower every 3 days? Oh, I forgot to eat today. Maybe I could have a little something, right? And so I love that you went exploration and discovery first, because none of these are a cure-all and none of these are a one-size-fits-all. You have to kind of discover and have the question mark, right? A lot of times we find the answer first. We haven't found the question first. Right? So being able to navigate, and that's where I think being able to form what are the questions and allowing yourself to not have the answers, and that's okay. We have to form the questions before we can even start to find the answers. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Just quickly, sorry, Wesley.
That's okay.
The right answer to the wrong question is often more disastrous, right?
Right.
And I really like that. I was speaking to Jedediah, who some of you know, a great guy. And just real quickly before I pass back to you, Wesley, I was talking about a suicidal thought that I'd actually had fairly recently, being fully transparent. And basically his response, and I thought it was so delicate and so interesting. He didn't say anything about it. He just said, basically, I'll summarize, but it was basically, your brain is designed to answer any questions that you give it, up to and including suicide, like, because that's an option that it has. The problem is what you've used a faulty question, so you're gonna get a flawed calculation. And he said, you're not supposed to be calculating how to get out of this situation. You're actually meant to be calculating how to make this situation better, like the one we were talking about. And I just really like that distinction, because all it did is I just went, oh shit, that's interesting. And it just gave me that break, which you were talking about. It's just that, and just matches so well with what you just said. So I just wanted to share that because I thought that was really interesting. That I've heard that twice now. So I find that really interesting.
I just wanted to add something real quick. We talk about it in sales, like people just make decisions based on emotion and justify with logic, and so it's a lot of our beliefs dictate our actions. And so I can't relate to your guys' backgrounds or whatever, but for me, the hardest and darkest pit to crawl out of was the belief, the axiomatic belief, because everything that you guys are saying are solution based, like, okay, here's how we fix the problem. For me, it was like, well, I don't feel like the problem's worth fixing. And the belief that, like, life, not being alive and not suffering and not being a piece of shit person that exists in the world meaninglessly, was a better alternative than existing. And I think that's the hard for the people that are in that pit. They hear the solutions, but it feels like homework to do. It feels like overwhelming and just like stressful. It feels exhausting is the word. Because I would posit that most people want to be happy, like myself. I know a lot of friends, there was a guy that I used to go to jujitsu with, and one of my best friends rolled with him all the time. He was like, got to black belt very quickly, younger than me, high performing dude, killed himself a couple months ago. And so I feel like that was the thing for me, is like trying to take the story that I was operating with and find a compelling story that was worth living for, if that made sense. And to try to find a belief in myself of why I could live. And it's hard, because when you want to kill yourself and you're at rock bottom and you're like, I don't give a shit, it doesn't matter. The sales pitch of like, well, life could be so great and you could have all these great experiences. It's like, I don't care, man. I'm exhausted. Like, I'm in stage 4 cancer right now. I just want to be done. Like, it's hard. And for me, I told Marco about this, but I watched a movie called The Sun, because I was like asking the universe, like, show me something, man. I'm about to end this thing. I was starting to plan it out and everything. And I watched this movie called The Son. It's about a kid that deals with depression, and Hugh Jackman's the dad, and he's does a brilliant job acting this movie out. And he doesn't understand what his son's dealing with, so he keeps trying to go in there and fix it for him, give him a better school environment, better lifestyle, better whatever. And the son, there's just something that is just off about him. And there's a lot of messages in there too, like the ignorance of even knowing what the problem is, et cetera, et cetera. But moral of the story, he does everything he can, and then at the end of the movie, the son ends up actually killing himself. And at the end of the movie, you're left wondering, did he actually kill himself? Because he shot himself, but it was in a bathroom, and you're like, well, maybe he survived it. In the last scene, he comes in, and Hugh Jackman's there, and he's like, hey, buddy, it's so good to see you. This is like 5 years in the future, and he's like, hey, dad, and he wanted to be an author. He's like, I just finished my copy of my book, and Hugh Jackman looks at the book, and it's called Death Can Wait, and it's his autobiography of how he survived suicide. And Hugh Jackman's like, I'm so proud of you, man. You really overcame this and conquered it and whatever. And they embrace and have this hug. And he's like, all right, I gotta go. My fiance is waiting for me. Da da da. And he's like, all right, buddy, I love you. And he walks out the door. And Hugh Jackman's new wife, his previous relationship was destroyed from this, but his new fiance comes in and he's like, honey, she's like, honey, are you okay? And he's just staring off into the abyss at this door. And you realize that the movie makes you think that was a real situation, but you realize he was actually hallucinating that. And then Hugh Jackman just breaks down and he's like, he could have been, I should have been there for him. He could have been so great. Da, da, da. And he just, the breakdown of that character allowed me to have a glimpse, and this is very dark, but into the pain that I would cause my dad, if I were to do that. And that's just one character in my life, because I have many characters, right? You guys are included. I love all you guys. But just having a visceral connection with the pain that I would cause, for me, I feel like a lot of my problems were ego based, right? Like a lot of the life isn't worth living where I was the common denominator. Like, I don't think I'm a good person. I don't feel like life is, worth living for me. There's going to be suffering for me. But when I had that selfless frame of like, to the harm that it would cause the people in my life if I were to be gone, that gave me something to live for, right? Even though it's selfless and there's not much me in it, it was the love of the people around me to be like, man, if I could live a better life for them, it would impact them positively. And so I just started to see things in terms of, that is worth living for, that is meaningful. And so yeah, I don't know where to end that, but that's kind of like the
That's
progress of where my journey is right now.
yeah, and I think yeah, go ahead, please.
Sure. I was gonna say, well, because I want to sit with this, because in some ways right now I feel, it's going to sound weird, I feel like a fraud, right? And the reason I do is I'm on these new meds, right? And when it was my birthday, it was one of my friend's weddings. And on these meds, you're not allowed to drink alcohol, right? And I don't drink, so it's not a massive issue. But it's like one of the side effects is sudden death. So I'm like, I'm not risking it, right, for just
No
a
shit.
quick glass, right?
God damn, dude.
But I was like, it's their wedding and it's my birthday and it's going to be a great day, so I'm not going to take them for that day and probably the day after, and I'm going to have some drinks and have fun and everything. Great day, right? Next day was also good, exhausted, nice day. The day after, when I was 2 days off my meds, everything I'm talking about right now wouldn't even matter. I physically, the spiral was so intense, and I was just like, and I think so I'm trying to balance how I feel right now while I'm on them versus how someone off of it, or how I normally would feel, needs to hear. And it's a really difficult, because again, when I take it, I feel like, oh, it's so obvious, and you do this and you do this. It feels like the limitless pill. I'm honestly, I mean, it's been amazing for me. But when I'm off it, everything you said, Wesley, resonates completely. And the other side of the coin for a lot of people is, if we're being really raw, the problem of thinking of other people to get you through it is, for some people, they've genuinely believed they are doing them the favor by going. And that's the hardest balance, because if you can hold on to it, that's awesome, and do. But some people, they've convinced themselves that because they're so worthless, it is even better when they're gone. When you're in that state, it is really hard for anything to touch you, because anything we talk about here. So the biggest thing that I felt in that stage was never a solution. It was, I think it was feeling seen, if I'm honest, which is why
Like
I'm
you
honest
don't
and
feel
open.
seen.
So I think if you're in that mode and you're shutting down and it's real nihilistic, nothing matters, it's better if I'm gone, all that. Someone, like you said, someone saying the world's got better plans for you. Yeah, I don't care. Like, that's the point. Like, I don't feel it. It doesn't matter. You're not going to rise that feeling. I think the only
Right.
time anything touched me was when someone would say something and I go, shit, that's exactly what I'm feeling right now. And I think for me, that's why I post the way I do. I don't post saying, if you're going through depression, hold on, it gets better. I say, I see you, I feel you, and this is how I feel in those situations. And that's all I can give you.
Yep.
Right. Because I
Because
feel like
it's
that's
isolating.
what, yeah. And again, I think that's how I want to express on this from my angle, from my little square on this Zoom podcast, is for those people and for you, Wesley, when you're going through those times, the thought of having a happier future, it doesn't even connect. It does, the happiness feeling isn't even there. It's just like, cool.
Right.
Like, it's not even a thing, right? It's like I don't even feel that. Like, and I maybe even don't even believe in it, or I know it's real, but I'm not going to get there. And it's more like, this is the thing where we're in this. I see you, I feel you, you're not on your own. There's others just like you. And I think that's always been a phrase for me. There's 21 Pilots song where he talks about that. It says there's millions of us just like you. And I think for me that's a big thing as well. It's like, and that's where the shame kicks in for men, because women in general, we're generalizing, but women in general do talk. So they do know they're not alone. In fact, more often than not, they're probably, if we weigh the sexes, they're more likely to be convinced everyone thinks what they think, right? Like, of course I'm in the right. Again, just generalizing. Whereas men, if you're in our situation, we're more than likely to think, well, of course I'm wrong, like, because I'm the stupid one, like, it doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
it's, there isn't anything we can say to make you feel better. What I can say is, I'm in that boat with you, if that's enough for right now, just for one more step. That would be all I could say. And again, one more thing, I know I'm going on rants, but one more thing, another thing that I heard that really helps when I'm in certain phases is is it the horse, the fox, and the boy, something like that, where he says he's lost in the woods. The boy says, I can't see where I'm going. And the horse says, look down, can you see where to step next? And he says, yeah. He says, do that. And I think when we're in those modes, this is why I don't like the online sales community. And I say that in a broad statement intentionally. When I came in, it was always about success. It was all about hitting these numbers. It was all about, some days, honestly, getting up and just lying in bed was a success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's enough. Like JD, you've talked about not having showers, like not brushing your teeth, like days and days of that. And it's like, just that is a step. So when you then have these other people who go, you're just not pushing yourself hard enough, you got to try harder, carry the boats, right? All that shit. And it's good for where it's needed, but for people in, and this is why it's such a difficult conversation, because that makes sense when you're like here, but when you're here, you don't even care. So it's like, in these moments, look down.
Yeah.
And I have I have WFN. That's what I write down. Which foot next? In those days, that's all that matters. Is it left or right? I can do that. And then on other days, I feel like I can carry the boats and I'll help you and I'll do that. And I think for me, that's where I come. It cycles, and good or bad, I don't know if that ever ends. And I say that with
But
tendency.
do you have that intrinsic axiomatic belief that life is worth living and that's why you put one foot in front of the other? Or why do you do it? Do you just do it because it's like, well, fuck it. The alternative is it's just a void of infinite blackness. So I'm, I can always take that option, but I might as well play devil's advocate and see if there's a choice. Like, why do you do it? Like, why do you justify doing it?
It's interesting. For me, it's changed a lot over the years. When I was younger, I was brought up Christian, And I this shows you where my head was at when I was probably about 13. I did a biblical study on suicide to see if it was actually a sin or not, and if I'd go to hell or not. That was how deep I was thinking at that time, to understand, can I do this and be okay? Obviously my beliefs have changed a lot about afterlife and all that side. I'm sure there's still things that ring true in there. For me, I don't know. I don't know what kept me going in certain times. I don't believe there's much afterwards. So it is just ending. And I'm like, do I want this to end, or do I just not want to feel like this?
Mm.
And sometimes that's just enough, and I can just kind of get through. But honestly, some days I've, like I said before, I think sometimes it's just because I didn't make the decision. I was just apathetic on it, being fully transparent. I'm
Like
still unsure fully.
apathetic on your apathy.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Let
that's
yeah, floating down the stream, not making decisions. That's how I stayed.
Yeah.
That's how I ended up in an abusive marriage. That's how I got, I don't see my kids because of everything that I had to go through in that stage. Reality is, did I make bad decisions or did I make no decisions? And really, I made no decisions. And I think that's led me a lot to here. Um, and yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Wesley, but for me, I don't think I have an answer. I think that's the whole point of this. I don't think there is one,
Yeah, no.
being real.
It's interesting. Yeah. I don't want to, but it's interesting because like Marco and I were talking a lot about the sentiments that you just mentioned before the podcast started of like, it doesn't matter what you say because like they believe, or I can't say that, I'm going to speak to myself, but like I believe that I would I would do better by the people I love by not being here because when you're depressed, you feel like you're creating a void or a vacuum. And you see it in your relationships, they start to deteriorate because you hear the opposite where it's like, well, surround yourself with positive people. Well, by definition, that means that the people that are void of negativity are going to be left behind, right? So it's isolating when people that are very close to me, I understand that I'm pulling them down and it's hard for them to exist. And go ahead. What
That's
were you gonna
really
say?
interesting because this is the literal brain thinking. This is a massive change for me. And sorry that I'm taking over this episode,
no,
guys.
dude. You're good. You're good.
Really
You're
am.
good. You're good.
But this has been a huge. A lot of people who struggle with this, I'm going to blanket statement, are probably some form of neurodivergent, right? We think a little different. And one of the main things of that is we're literal thinkers. So what's really interesting, and I want to just give you this thought, is don't be around be around those that lift you up, or whatever you said then, right? Like, be around those. So your brain goes, "Oh, I'm depressed, so I'm clearly not in that equation," because that's the literal difference. In reality, what that statement actually means is that the people that come to you and go, that wasn't very good, or they critique you, or you're a bit shit, like the people who are actively bringing you down, that's who
Right.
they're referring to, right? Your brain's going, that's me, because it's a literal translation. And this has been massive for me in sales, in everything. That's not what they mean, man. They don't mean if you're depressed they can't be around you. What they mean is there's people out there trying to bring them down. That ain't you, dude. Otherwise you won't
Well,
be on this call, right?
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a slight nuance to what I was trying to say because like I feel like with again, speaking of my situation, I spewed negativity and it was hard for people to associate like there comes to a point like even my best friends where they give me everything, man. Like I've had really intense conversations with my best friend on the porch like, hey man, it's just a matter of how, not when, and I just need to figure out how to mitigate the pain and risk involved and everything like that. And he's giving me everything, but he just can't relate to it. And eventually he feels helpless. He's like, I don't know what to do. And people just start to kind of isolate and distance themselves because it's like a dark subject matter to be around. Like people want to be around people that make them feel happy and then it reaffirms this belief of like, well, everyone's just intrinsically selfish zombies and I'm just in this void of nothingness. And do you relate to that? Does anybody relate to that, or is that just a personal vendetta?
No, I definitely relate to it, and I see that there's experience, right? And then we build these logic bridges, right? So
Mhm.
like one thing that was said is like the void of negative, right? And then the other thing is like I want to be around people that make me happy, right? But there's I mean, this crew, right? I'm not around you because you make me happy. I'm not around you. I'm not on this podcast because you're void of negative. Quite the opposite, right? The reason we connect is because I relate to your negative. I relate to that darkness. My favorite people are the darkest people, right? So there's intention and there's burden and all of these things. But for me, what I found in a middle ground is I don't want to, like, it kind of is like, what's wrong with this person if they're just sunshine and rainbows all the time, right? I also, like Dave said, I don't want to be around people that have a negative intention, right? But for me, the people who have been scarred and been through that darkness and continue to fight, right? Those are the people I want to be around. Those are the ones I find interesting. Those are the ones I want to read about, right? So there's this middle ground, right, where maybe that means, and I've had it before, where I lose friends that can't relate to that. And maybe I have friends and kind of sequencing of like, we find ourselves in this hole and it's like, well, if I can't go there and I can't go there, fuck it. Right. And when option A is not right and option B, that's kind of the definition of hopelessness. And for me, what Dave was talking about is like, sometimes the win is in the delayed decision. If you can wake up and for anybody that's knows the struggles with alcoholism, right? It's not okay. We're gonna conquer this thing and we're gonna go for 20 years sober, right? Delay the drink.
Yeah.
I had a student that was struggling with self-harm. And they were expecting, I think, because sometimes I do get in that trap of like, I have a savior complex. I want to save everybody, yeah. Right? And I can be fucking obnoxious with it, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Why do you have a fucking answer, right? It's like,
Honestly.
stop trying to solve anything. And then I realized that was also when you try and fix something, right? That makes someone feel worthless and needing fixing. And then it stimulates burden. So I have good intentions, right? But through relationships, I've known when to choose. And like Dave said, sometimes it's just that understanding, right? They did this huge study on depression, both clinical and situational and chronic. And they polled them and they figured out what is the commonality between this, because some is situational. It's like, it's right there. That's why I'm depressed. And some people like, I wake up on a Tuesday, everything's good around me. My family's happy, bills are being paid, and I feel like it's worthless. Right. And they were trying to find the commonality between them. And the number one thing was, I don't feel understood. I don't feel like anyone understands me and I don't understand anyone else. Right. That was the commonality. Right. And so with what I realized, because this is a new journey for me as well. I'm trying to save the world. Right. And I realized that there's also ego and significance and all that comes from it. Right. And I'm learning different skills, but my natural tendency was to want to save this person and convince them and all of these things. And what I ended up coming out was, can you wait 30 minutes? Set the timer and then cut yourself in 30 minutes. If you can't wait 30 minutes, let's do 25. And that delayed, right? It didn't fix the problem, didn't fix the core. Right. And what I've started looking at it is like, kind of like, I'm probably old school, but headphones, when they had a cord, I know they don't have them, but I still have them. Right. If I reach into my bag and I grab them and they are tangled to shit, and I try and yank it out, right? I try and do the one action that's going to untangle everything. What happens? It gets tighter. Right. And a lot of times, even though people have good intentions, what they're trying to do is pull on that to untangle all those knots. And some of those knots, we understand in the physical realm, right? No one becomes overweight or morbidly obese in a day, right? We understand that this problem's been progressive, and no one is going to be like, well, just hit the gym for 12 hours and you can negate this 20-year experience, right? And so what it was for me was, one, I didn't feel life was worth living, and I didn't have a strong belief that it was worth living, right? That's again a hindsight. Some of the things I'm sharing is a hindsight of 18 years reflection. It's 2020, right? It's easier said than done, right? But if you ask me in the moment, right, it was like, just delay. Just delay.
Yeah.
The goal today is delay, right? Be a little bit less destructive, right? Like, instead of drinking till 7 p.m. the next day, right, after a bender, right, let's cut it down to noon, right? Let's try and extend. Let's try and put those little pauses in between. It doesn't have to, I don't have to be hopeful for that. I don't have to think of it, but let's start delay. Let's create some space if possible, right? And today, my job is to survive.
Are you
And
guys fans of are you sorry to interrupt, but are you guys fans
Sure.
of Jordan Peterson by any chance?
Absolutely.
It was
He's
interesting. One of the
Canadian, of
videos
course he is.
yeah, right. But anyways, one of the videos I watched when I was trying to seek an answer was a clip from him, and someone in the audience asked, like, what do you do? What would you say to someone that's like right on the brink of ending it all and whatever? And his advice was very unorthodox to me, but it reflected, some of the sentiments you just brought up. He said, well, you can always do it tomorrow, which is interesting because it's like you said, he wasn't saying don't do it. He was just like, you could always do it tomorrow. So you could just procrastinate on the killing yourself part of life. He's like, you could always do it tomorrow. And I also want you to just consider, before doing it, just consider that I've spoken to many dozens and dozens of moms and wives and whatever that never really recover from that kind of a thing, from someone in their life doing it. So just consider the ripple effect that could do for the people in your life and the trauma that it could create before making that decision. And both of those things aren't like fixing the axiomatic belief thing. Oh my God. I don't know what that was, but
that's that's what
Perfect.
I don't like that.
It's
I
the
do
Mac.
thumb and I get a
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
about to get it. Oh my God.
Can you do the fireworks? Can you give me two double? That's gonna give you fireworks, I think.
I don't know.
Yeah, confetti, dude.
Anyways,
Perfect.
it doesn't fix the axiomatic side of things, but it at least gives you time enough to fix it. It's like when you have the chemo, it gives you a little bit more time to figure out if that makes sense, the solution, and so yeah, I just thought it related to what you were saying there.
And I think what you brought up before and the question you asked Dave, it's like, I resonate so much with what he was saying, and like, I don't have the answer, but it was like, whatever is close to me. It's like, sometimes it's this idea, sometimes it's that idea. It's like, whatever I can use. Sometimes I don't have a, safety device to float, but I have a log, like whatever I can use around me, whatever idea that gets me through, that's a good idea. Right. And it might be different each time. Maybe I don't have the hope today, but I have this. And maybe for me, what really helped, and it's a weird thing, is it's that selfish ego desire of like, I don't want to go out without having some impact. So for a long time, I went with my life is worthless, right? But like, maybe I can do something for someone. And it was an idea, right? There was no certainty before there's belief, right? It was like a question mark, a theory. It's like, like, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to do it with any money in my bank account. That seems wasteful. So I want to buy someone lunch. I want to contribute in some way, or I want to make someone else who's going to be here longer than me. I want to make their life a little better, or I want to add some sort of something to someone. And that was an idea that held me on long enough. That was a delay. Right. And then other times it was my family and the people around me and thinking about that. And other times it was the burden of potential. Like, fuck, that seems like a waste. And whatever it was that I could grasp at, I didn't question if that was the optimal or the best. It was just like that bought me time. Right. And I kept buying time. And then I started seeing different perspectives, and I built some momentum slowly. But I think for me, it was very interesting because this is not something I grew up with. I think it was more later on, and it was within, my life was relatively perfect at the time. I had everything that I wanted, and the future was bright. And then it was gone. My plans were gone. The three most important people in my life, right, were all gone within a matter of, I wasn't even partially over one, and then the next one is gone. And then weeks later, the next one was gone. My grandfather committed suicide, I lost my fiance, and my best friend got murdered. Boom, boom, boom. Right. And I had, going through all the cycles, right, I had nothing to point at. They didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. You're only supposed to do this when you fuck up, right? You go through a bad breakup, you're like, oh, that person cheated on me, or I did this, or you have something. And I'm going through and just looking for it. And I think that's one thing we do, is kind of the bargaining. I wish, right? And then it's the unfairness. I didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. I don't deserve this. We kind of rationalize this, right? And that resentment. But in a weird way, like, the symptoms took me outside of myself. So the first symptom I dealt with, right, because I've always had pretty good coping mechanisms. And I thought that that was, you know, you cope and you're positive and you're over it. But I never really dealt with it at the root. My body responded in this weird way of like, you're playing on the surface and the foundation's fucked. And so I developed insomnia. And, you know, it made me a world-class partier. So that was the positive. You know, if you ever want to just out party everybody and, you know, be able to bender, insomnia is perfect for that, right? Like I could basically party with a group of friends. When they were all going to sleep, I could find another group of friends, party with them. When these guys woke up, I could still keep it going. But what started with me is I started to lose that sanity. And in a weird way, that probably saved my life. Because what's very difficult when I'm talking to other people is they have it so affirmed in their beliefs, and they have facts, and they have evidence, and they've backed it up, and they built this case that's very hard to infiltrate. I went fucking insane. And I remember after being up for 3 days, looking in the mirror, and I swear that the mirror, like the reflection, laughed at me, and it scared the shit out of me. It just like snapped me out of like, oh, there's something happening in here. And thankfully with that, I realized this is a chemistry issue. It's a personal issue, right? But the chemistry issue woke me up. And that gave me that little separation of something's happening in my biochemistry. And that stayed with me when I dealt with depression, when I dealt with, witness guilt, that guilt of seeing something happen and you feel like, why should I feel bad? These are the real victims, right? What it allowed me to do was like, there is personal, but there's some sort of chemistry happening here. And the chemistry is not unique to me. And what that did was allowed me to be curious. And why I bring this together is because I didn't feel understood. No one had went through the situation, right? And no one had the right things to say. People's advice is always fucking horrible in this, right? They have the perspectives. And again, it frustrates you, right? But my not feeling alone or feeling understood didn't come from people. It came from the curiosity of looking at what's happening in my brain from a biochemistry standpoint. And that led me to go to therapy. And that therapy gave me some more understanding. And then it allowed me to find the similarities in people that, even though we haven't had the same experience, you know, I take Dave pill, it doesn't do the same thing for me, right? So the solutions are different, the problems are different, but pain is pain. Not feeling understood is not feeling understood. Hopelessness is hopelessness. Trauma is trauma. Grief is grief. Loss is loss. And so even though I couldn't connect on the level of how you cope and what you're dealing with and your problem and your situation, I started to connect with people on the pain, right? And the experience and the suffering of life. But that started with the curiosity of what's happening in my brain from a biochemistry level. And it was like, yep, that's it. And so it was a weird place of understanding, but that delay and that curiosity was what started to climb out. And I wish I could say that it got better right then, right? I had to hit rock bottom and I had to destruct more, right? Like my thing wasn't as much like I had the suicidal thoughts, but I'm like, well, the easiest way out is just self-destruct. And then, you know, if I die in this way, it's, oh yeah, but people don't have to carry that. So I'm like, I'll just bottom out, right? So it's like the slow, painful way, right? But that delayed enough, and then that curiosity and that little bit of understanding from a medical standpoint allowed me to get out of the personal and then find the connection. The connection came way later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you bring up something that is, I think I want to cover and bring to light is Wesley and I were talking about it earlier, the type of mental illness that is biological, as opposed to the one that is more, what's the word? Almost like what's that? Yeah, situational, like mindset type stuff, right? So for example, I think the stuff that I deal with is more of the pity party, the downward, what I like to call it the downward death spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And through certain practices and faith. So here it is. All right. So here's the joke. Okay. Let's talk about it. All right. So I got an insurance policy on my ass. All right. Life insurance policy. If I kill myself, no go. All right. So got to get that out of the way. That's not an option. For as much as I want to fucking be like, man, I got the gun, I got the rifle. Okay, that's quick. Hold on a second. Do I want to hang myself? No, that's gonna fucking suck because I know there's gonna be a moment after I shit myself where I'm like, this was dumb. Do I want to do I want to do the poison route? I'm like, yeah, but which one? OD on some opiates? I'm like, God, that's gonna fucking feel like shit. And so just going through the whole thing, and then at the end of the day, thinking well, I could always go into the bathtub with the gun. Nope, because your mom is gonna fucking clean that mess, and that's gonna be bad for her. I'm like, all right, so it's all just sounds dumb.
Yeah, bad
right?
plan.
It just sounds dumb. And then of course, then I gotta romanticize it. I'm like, the only way I would do it would be like if I'm holding off the enemies at the pass and I'm telling everybody, go, I got this. And I got the grenade, right? It's like some fucking 300 shit, right?
Mm.
So we've got the issue where, okay, so you've got some some biological stuff where it's like, okay, well, if you take this, it's gonna help you out. Okay, wonderful. Then you've got these other things that you can engage in. So of course, like on my end, what has really helped me through this, and by the way, real quick, this is another reason why we're talking about this. I was at the ER yesterday, right? And I've got this umbilical hernia that I'm dealing with. And as they were taking my vitals, the very first fucking question she asked, she goes, are you having any thoughts about hurting yourself or others? And I looked at her and I was like, no more than usual. And then she laughs and then she goes, okay, but seriously, are you having any? I was like, is this the, I was like, the last time I was in the ER was years ago, 7 years ago when I busted this thing before my son was born. And that was not a question that was asked.
Right.
And I'm glad that that question's being asked. It's why we're talking about this. And so what's worked for me is, especially this year, I've got this one like suicidal thoughts per minute, right? STMs, kind of like RPMs. And so like if my STMs are higher than normal, I know I'm dealing with something that needs to get addressed. And how I mentioned earlier, the certain practices that I have as fallbacks as far as leveling me out, creating that baseline. Some form of exercise, some form of body movement, some form of energy work, breath work, some form of meditation. This right here also, journaling. Every fucking morning, 3 pages. I journal and I don't give a fuck what it is. I just write. And it doesn't have to be fucking legible, dude. It can be hella fucking messy. It doesn't matter. Right. And so these are the practices that I have that have helped me. And this year I came across, and I think the only person that I haven't mentioned it to already is JD, but Michael Singer's work and seeing things from his perspective and how, he describes himself as this Jewish yogi who loves to teach his teachings of Jesus. And I came across his work and I started listening to it. And at first I was like, what the fuck, old man? And then I'm like, what the fuck, old man? Okay. So we've got, and we've already talked about it and we mentioned it, all these different tools to use, all these different modalities, all these different things. But I think the biggest, grandest point here is so important. Find people that understand you. We have to be understood. I think that is one of the most fundamental needs that we have, to feel understood. In my men's group that I've been part of for over a decade, men evolving nonviolently, men typically don't get a chance and an opportunity to talk about this. Like we're seeing it more and more, which is fucking great. And I think more of that awareness happened, especially after the Iraq-Afghanistan war, and you saw basically 22 veteran suicides a day. And that's like, holy shit. And men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. Holy shit. And 64 of those suicides are going to be by a fucking firearm. Fuck me. Okay. So here we are, we're talking about this. And in these meetings and that we have, after a man gets to express himself, however he needs to, we ask, do you feel heard? Sometimes that's all it takes, is for someone to feel fucking heard. And if you find yourself in a situation,
it's hard to say. Oh, go ahead.
ahead.
Finish your thought.
I was
just gonna say it's oh, we got a little delay. You go first.
I'm just gonna say, if you find yourself in a situation where you're not feeling heard, that's the tough part. That's the scary part. I think especially for younger men. Fuck it. What am I saying? For everyone. But I think it's one of those things that if you're able to identify these things sooner and start to try your best to take action. And I think that's the hard part, because there's all kinds of suicide hotlines, all kinds of things that you can find, but it's that getting over of that, as Dave brought up earlier, that shame. Shame is such a weird fucking thing that we put on each other. And where does it come from? From how we were raised, from our societies, from our religion and things like that. And so we've got all these things that we gotta wrestle with and reframe and overcome, and however you want to go about it. But to find a tribe of like-minded people where you can be safe with your vulnerability and express what you got to express, because we hold so much fucking in here. So much. Wesley.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you could debate if it's like nature or nurture that causes a lot of these issues, and it's probably both in different circumstances. And honestly, it's hard to actually, when you think about it, it's hard to distinguish nature versus nurture, how in sync we are with our environment. But I definitely feel like this, and fuck it, I don't know what your guys' beliefs are or whatever, but I feel like this political and cultural landscape right now isn't the most conducive to men's mental health in the world, and the weight that's put on, and the isolating feeling it can feel at times when you feel like you don't have value, and and you have to create value, but you don't have a mechanism by which to do that, and you feel isolated, and and then you're using your mental mechanism against itself, like Dave mentioned at the beginning, where and JD, where you get in this loop where you have more thoughts than you have actionable steps to do anything about it, and then you're thinking about the problems instead of what connects us, and it's isolating. And I feel like the landscape in America is very interesting because it's very divisive, but like yet we have so much in common. Like we all just talked about, like we all have different experiences and vantage points of how we have different mental health issues and experiences in our lives. And it's interesting because like I could think of an infinite, seemingly infinite amount of things that all four of us disagree with each other about. But I could also flip that and think of all the things that connect us. And JD was talking about, and Dave, about just having someone that relates to you. It's not even so much about finding someone that's positive or negative, but just finding someone that hears you and sees you. And I think that's part of the work is thinking about the things that connect us and bring us together rather than all the differences we have with people, because then you can get in a super victim mindset where you're like, well, no one understands my life because it's super niche and not unique. Like I was homeschooled, I got family of 16, I have all these different issues that have gone on, and it's like I could think of all the things that abstract me from reality, and then I just become so detached that I miss that component that JD was talking about of like feeling grounded and feeling connected with people and with life. It's like just a thought to put out there. I'm not going to posit like a solution, but just a thought for you guys.
I love it. It's exactly what I wanted to discuss, which is we are not more divided. We are introduced to more divide. We are more connected than we've ever been. Quality of life is better than it's ever been. There's more potential than there has ever been. We are overloaded with the thing that gets attention. There's an attention machine, and we pay attention to negative things, right? They know what gets us to tune in. We have more access to news. We can see what's happening. All of those things are happening. When you look at history, all of those things, there's always been war. There's always been genocides. There's always been these horrible things. Now it's right in front of our face, right? And it's been really, travel definitely has helped me get out of that. But I realized I'm not going to be shown it. I have to seek it. There are fucking amazing people doing amazing things every day, right? And I've trained my algorithm. I have an algorithm that is different than my business algorithm, and I log in and it shows me positive shit. It shows me people feeding homeless people. It shows me animal shelters being built. It shows me charitable organization. It shows me, I've trained it, and it took a long time to train, right? Because I said, I will only watch this shit. I will skip through anything negative, and I want to see good people doing good things, and holy fuck, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But it's not on the news, right? If I'm tuning into the news hoping for good shit, holy fuck, right? It's going to show me the most divisive, most critical, the worst things happening. Here's who died. Here's what happened. Here's all the negative things. But as I've seeked out, right, from a place of, maybe I don't have the time to devote. Maybe I don't have the time or resources to start my own charity. But I want to find out who's doing good things, and I want to support them. And when I seek it, I'm like, I'm overloaded with it. It's everywhere, but it's not being shown, right? And the other thing that I wanted to say, which is kind of the mind fuck for me, is the thing that makes us feel most alone is also the thing that connects us all, which is suffering. That's why we're all here, right? So that's what isolates us, yet that's the guarantee. It's the one guarantee in life, that we're all going to suffer, that we're all going to say goodbye at some point, or we're going to say goodbye the other side, right? We're either saying goodbye to someone or they're saying goodbye to us. We're all going to suffer loss. We're all going to find ourselves in a gutter. We're all going to deal with insurmountable challenges. We're all going to suffer. If you're not suffering, check yourself for a pulse. It's probably over, right? And so it's crazy that the thing that isolates us the most is also the most common thing that we all have to share. But if Dave is thinking, well, I'm not going to talk about this because I'll be judged, because I'll be this. And then Marco's like, yeah, well, Dave always seems so positive, so I don't want to bring my shit. And then Wesley's like, I don't want to be a burden to society. And then we're all sitting around and we all have this deep shit. And it's like a junior high dance. Like everybody's afraid to be the one that looks stupid, so no one has fun. Right. So it's being able to, one, know that what you see on Instagram and what you see, the Robin Williams of the world, well, I wouldn't want to burden myself with that guy. He's always happy. He's always entertained. Right? Most of the people I know that aren't here because of that were the most fun-loving, the most generous, the life of the party, the larger than life, right? I was like, well, I don't want to burden, I don't want to bring that person down with my shit, right? So it's that Instagram life of what we see is not what's going on. That there's good shit happening and there's bad shit happening, yes, right? There's good people doing good things and there's good people going through horrible things, right? But these conversations and going the extra mile and giving someone, holding that space and forcing the issue, right? You say you're all good, but like, there's got to be some shit going on, right? Going the extra mile to draw it up and then letting it sit and finding that relation point. To me, that's the opportunity. And then untying one knot at a time, one piece, right? A little less horrible, right? I get up, I get the shower, that's the win, right? And then I start untying the next knot. And I do that. For me, it's been curiosity. I'm fascinated by how my brain works, the negative and the positive. If it wasn't my life, I think I'm a great fucking case study. Now, when it's my life, it's, oh my God, there's the frustration and pressure, but kind of becoming the observer and becoming curious of how these things work and finding the connection. To me, that's been super helpful.
That's work. The observer stance,
Ugh.
the objective witness to your life. Singer is huge on that. And that's just, we're talking ancient wisdom stuff here. And that's what saved my ass this year from just those intrusive fucking thoughts that it's like, dude, you suck, you this, you that, just that fucking voice, right? Whatever you want to, evil Marco, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, petty Marco. And then to think, wait a minute, hold on a second. Those are just thoughts. Am I my thoughts? No, I'm not. I'm the awareness behind that. And it's not just this one time. For me, it's not just this one time thing. I said it, oh, I'm good. Fuck no. It is work on a daily. On a fucking daily. Favorite, I've said it before and I'll say it again, favorite Zen story. You've got a young monk hanging out with an old monk and they're meditating. The young monk says to the older monk, says, Master, how long must we do Zazen? And he looks at him and he says, till the day we die. Till the day we die. So it's that daily work that has helped me out, that keeps me going, to have that awareness. It's I swear to God, every day is like, in some sense, every day is like Groundhog Day. If you guys remember that movie. And it's like, you start off with the same amount of time. You got your daily things that you got to take care of and all your stuff. You get up, use the bathroom, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end of the day, it's like, for me, something that works is inventory time. And just winding down. JD brings it up. He talks about it as tactical reflection, right? However you want to call it, but I think it's super important to have those moments with yourself. We get so caught up, especially with the sales game. So I think a big part of this too, this conversation, is what is being shown, what this fucking face is, this facade. And it's like, when you start looking, you're like, there's fucking cracks there, dude. What's behind those fucking cracks? We're talking about these fucking cracks. That's what we're doing here. It's the real shit. That's the stuff that people want to relate to, that can. Because what's the other stuff? It's like fucking glitz and glamour. It's like that celebrity Hollywood lifestyle. You kind of got that in the sales game a little bit. And that creates what? These like fucking unrealistic expectations. It's like having the fucking 6-pack abs and being ripped all the time and this and that. And it's just like, oh my God, that's exhausting. For the rest of us, average fuckers, like what can we do? And it's like, okay, well, what can you do? Do a little bit. Doesn't have to be fucking this mega massive, whatever it fucking is. If you can do just this little bit today, cool. If not, that's okay too. And that nighttime thing that I do, here's another component, and it goes back to the journaling practice. When I'm doing the thing without judgment, that's another skill set. That's a hard one. Because you're going to have that moment where you still are judging yourself. And then you got to fucking have that awareness behind not judging yourself around, And so, and it's this game.
Yeah.
I mean, why? I mean, if we can look at, I mean, video games have been around fucking for a long time now. It's not this new thing. And when I was a kid, it was Atari, and my brothers were about 10 years older than me. And so they were playing the first games. And so video games has always been around, and people talk about, well, gamify your life. And it's like, yeah, okay, let's gamify this shit. Why the fuck not? That is an analogy I think most kids, most people can relate to. And so just what can you do? The observer, pulling back, reminding yourself of that. Again, it's not this whole like, cool, we talked about it and you've got this fucking word track. You're good, dude. It's like, fuck no. That's just the beginning. The beginning is just having that awareness around the issues that you have. Like, okay, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's okay to admit that. I'm not okay. As opposed to, I'm fine, dude. I'm good. I'm good, dude. No, it's all good.
Can I speak to this a little?
Please.
It's fascinating, and been listening to all your stories. First of all, I want to honor all of you for just how real and raw you've been, because I think what's been really interesting is, like JD said, the only link has been the suffering. Everyone's story is so different, and like we even interpret things differently. And like I can even get a sense, and I hope I'm not stepping out of turn here, but I can get a sense that when Marco and JD, you've spoke about some stuff, my brain and potentially Wesley's have been thinking the same sort of things, in like when you've been like, you just got a journal and stuff, and I'm just like, fuck that. My brain won't even let me. And like, it's like even that relation is different, right? But everything's the same. Couple thoughts on all of this. The first one, actually working backwards, what you were just talking about. I think one of the biggest issues we have in our current culture is identity. Let's call it identity politics, right? I don't necessarily mean political. I just mean identity politics, right? It's you are whatever you say you are, right? You're this thing. That's obviously always going to cause an issue, because whatever you put out there can only be a portion, and then you've got to be like, but I'm this thing. And I think in our world, it's like you said, there's this like, you've got to put out this, I'm a salesperson, I'm this, I'm whatever. And it's like, but that means I've got to be that holy. And then people like us are always just like, well, of course, that's not all of me. That lends itself to a lot of other issues with mental health, because we shouldn't compartmentalize those things, because you're not an identity of one thing, right? Like you're not that one thing. But it's dangerous from the other side, because you're also like, I am depressed. So that is me. I am depression becomes your identity rather than a thing. But while you've all been talking, I've been listening to the different ways you've described stuff. And it is really interesting, because I think all four of us are at a different stage currently, and it'll fluctuate for each of us, right? Like, so when I was talking about earlier, some days I can't even get out of bed, right? And then other days I'm like, great, this is amazing and things are good. Like that scale, right? We're all currently at a different level. And I was just wondering if there's different things at play for the different parts of it. And what we're doing, it's funny because we're just talking about it, but there's still that part of me that's disappointed we haven't come up with an answer, right? Like, I still wanted to solve it, even though I know you can't solve it. But I was wondering, like, we talked about like the bio, I forget what you called it now, JD, like biomechanical or bio, just chemicals, whatever you called it. Like, there's that stage. You've got your mental, which was like your mindsets. That's more like your conscious side. You've got societal and you've got environmental. And I wonder if each moment of that, if you're in like a stage of shame, depression, anxiety, like the negative, let's call it just the negative zone, I wonder if it depends on that as well. Like if you're in the negative zone of your biochemical, then you need to do something to change the chemical imbalance in that moment. It's not a fix, it's not a permanent, that isn't you. It's just like in this moment, I've woke up and I'm spiraling. I can't even have a shower. Like in that moment, that's not like a societal problem, right? That's like probably here. Then you have like the other stage where like you're about to jump on a sales call perhaps and you're speaking about how negative you are and you're having that negative chatter and you're just like, this is going to go really bad. I'm a rubbish salesman. I'm worse. Like that's like your mindset. So it's like, how do you attack that? And I think sectioning it like that can also be an interesting thing to think on. And I think it goes to JD's curiosity. That could in itself be a stop. Instead of you going, how do I solve this? You go, oh, do you think this is like a biochemical response or is it societal? Have I just done something or have I heard something and it's triggered me? And I think even just that is an interesting thought I'd never even considered. But the reason I bring that up as well is there's a general, the stats might be skewed, obviously, but there's a generally accepted view that during wartime or a time of in a difficulty in a country, suicide rates drop because there's a my interpretation and from what I've understood is because there's now a purpose that is bigger than you, right? Like it's interesting that you want to take your own life and then someone comes to take your freedom away and you're like, hang on, I'm not standing for that, even though you were literally about to do it, right? But the thing that's interesting as well, because I don't know if it is Peterson, but someone brought up during one of the wars, it might have been during the London bombings, and there was loads of men who were back in their home country, and they were all in hospital beds in the psych ward. They were all depressed, and no one could get them out of bed. And then when the bombings happened, they needed people to man the ambulances, and all the men went and did it, and like they could move and they had a purpose. I think that's an interesting thing to think on as well sometimes. That's why I think identity is difficult and a problem though, because they weren't ambulance drivers, right? That's what we would do in our culture now. We'd fix a label. It's like, no, they just had that day. They now had a purpose that they could do for that day. And I think sometimes that's all you've got to look at as well, is it's not, don't find your life's purpose would be my biggest caution to someone like me. If I could go back in time, I would tell myself to stop looking for my life's purpose because that's probably
Yeah.
more responsible for me overthinking, procrastinating, getting depressed, having shame. Because by the time I was 30, I wanted to do all this stuff, right? I'm not saying don't have goals and being careful walking a line, but what would it have looked like to have just been like, what purpose could I give myself today? Or what is this? Or,
Well,
and again, it's not who I am. You know what I mean? That's just a thing.
Dave, you're
Like,
you're positing. I think you're positing like a why, but it's just like closer in reach than an existential fucking reason to that I live. It's like right. It's like
yeah.
something that you can actualize on, if that makes sense. Or am I
Yeah.
being wrong? But I think that's
No,
what
I
you're
think
saying is
so.
like it's a why just within your reach of what you think you can do, which
I think so.
Jordan talks about that.
Yeah, and I think that plays again with my literal thinking of your why needed to be your ultimate purpose, because then I'd be like, well, that's not good enough, right? Having a shower today isn't a good enough reason to be existing, right? And but my other issue is when I think of like what I want, like my ultimate goal, I'd rather live in that brain mode of thinking about it, right? That's way more exciting than what I'm doing now. Like it's way better life. So then like coming back to reality was just like a shoot down. So there's all that going on. But I think this is why for me it's like understanding again, suffering does link us all. And that I think the problem with our culture as well that we've been raised in is we've tried to solve the wrong problems probably as humans, and it's like we've tried to get comfort, we've tried to get rid of suffering, we've tried to get rid of this and that and have these things, and by like the cliche, like with the microwave generation, right? Like it's just quick fast food right now, like that's what I want. And the problem is these issues we're talking about, that there isn't supposed to be, in my opinion, a solution to it. It's that there's a relationship with it during the things you go through. So why do they classically rate a lot of the African countries that are still in like the tribal things as like the happier people, it's because they're living in relationship to their struggle and to the way that we're made, whereas we are naturally trying to live against the relationship. It's kind of like, instead of trying to work through the relationship, it's like you've either got, really, we're the abusers, right, of the relationship as a culture. We've tried to dominate the relationship rather than having a actual relationship, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense.
with
And
us.
I love your perspective for a couple of reasons. Was one, you also share that resistance, right? Of like, fuck journaling and fuck this and fuck you for even bringing it up. And I think we've all felt that at some point in different ways. I've experienced some of you personally, right? Where I've been the, yeah, fuck you. And I think that's so important as well. But to me, it's this idea of be careful what you wish for. Okay. So who doesn't love a sunny day?
Vampires.
Right. Yeah. Right. I love the sun. Love it. Right. And then I went and lived in northern Canada. And there's a time of year where it's 24-hour sun.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I would love some darkness right now.
Mhm.
Right. We want sunny days, but we also need the rainy days, or there would be horrible situations. Right. I think what Dave is talking about is our natural tendency to short sight and say, I don't like that. I don't like how it feels. I want to remove it. Okay. And so if we remove suffering, what is happiness? What is a good day if there's no bad days?
Mhm.
It's nothing. It means nothing. What happens when we finally figure out our purpose? It's nothing, right? If we start with a purpose, it has no meaning. I've been trying to explain in this industry, right? Like, there's people that want to sell you the ease and convenience.
Mhm.
If it was easy and convenient, we'd all make $7 an hour, right? It'd be a remote call center. So the difficulty and the ability to embrace that difficulty is rare. And when something in our society, for whatever reason, is rare, it's valuable. So it's the yin and the yang. We have to accept that suffering, in my mind, this is a belief, right? That suffering is a necessary part of life. It's necessary. It serves a purpose. I don't always know, and I don't always believe that in the moment. And again, this is reflective. I have to remind myself of these things, even when I don't believe them, right? I didn't realize, it took me a couple of years to turn it around and climb out of the gutter, and a couple of years of, debauchery and just having selfish fun. And then all of a sudden, the pain and difficulty I went through is now the most valuable thing I have to share in a mentorship. Like Dave was saying, if I went and seeked that, I was so far away from that. I would have told him, go fuck yourself, right? But I didn't see that until after. And now my mistakes and my heartache and my loss and my trauma and dealing with all of these things are some of the most valuable things that I bring to the table, and the things that connect me most with to sort out. And so the analogy that I use is, right, you're the captain of a ship and you look on the radar and there's 3 ships on the radar. No captain is going to be like, well, I guess there's only 3 ships in the ocean. Right? We understand that we see in front of us, right? But we have to move forward to see more. We don't unlock what's there until we move forward, and we have to take a blind faith in that if I don't move forward, it's only going to be what I see in front of me. And maybe I don't like what I see in front of me. So I have to move forward to get a new perspective. I have to pair this responsibility with some sort of forward momentum, no matter how small, but I have to take those steps. Right? And I might not know my meaning. And some people don't find that out until later on. But being able to explore that, right, and remove that false peak, that your goal in life is to remove suffering, that your goal in life is to remove challenge. We understand it from a fitness realm, right? You can go and sit on the bike and hang out and not work up a sweat and check your phone, right? We understand that the gift is in that pain, right? I remember I was the shortest kid in my class. And then puberty hit. And all of a sudden, my body started to stretch, and I could literally feel it. It was such a horrible, throbbing pain, and it kept me up at night. And at that time, why is this happening to me? I just wish that pain would go away. Now I'm 6'3". I'm really glad I went through that pain, but I didn't have that perspective then. I only gained the perspective that the trauma that I went through and the insomnia and the depression and the horrible loss, right? Only through going through it and getting some distance from it did I realize it's actually the most valuable thing I've ever went through, and it's made me who I am, and I wouldn't be me without it. And if you could take it away, I wouldn't let you. I would fight to keep it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to express that when someone's going through it. It's like telling a young kid, you got time. You're like, yeah, fuck off, old man.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how to express that you have time. I don't know how to express that all of this could be working for you. Other than just, we'll see.
Yeah.
Hang on and get some perspective. And if I'm wrong, at least I bought you some time.
Yeah. Well said.
Could I say something just before? Because I know you're going to have to wrap up soon.
Please. Yeah, please.
Two things. One, I 100% agree with JD on that, and I think a way to view that is when I think of the gym thing, I always think, yeah, but that's if I want to get fitter. That's if I want to grow, right? So it's like it's worth the pain. I think the relationship I'm having to understand with life is it's not about if you lay in your bed, if we're talking physically, if you lay in your bed and never moved, your body would decay. So the type of friction we're talking about is like you're walking, right? Like that's what the life suffering is. And then when you have those big moments of growth, you go through like a big moment of suffering. I think in the day to day, it's hard to visualize that because you're like in that moment, you're like, I don't want to get better. So I don't want that pain. I think it's realign that relationship as like, that's just your friction of walking through life, the equivalent of walking along the footpath, the pavement, whatever, sidewalk, whatever you crazy people call it. Whether it's walking along there, and it's that friction that you've got used to now, right? Like your legs are hurting, but they're not anymore, right? Because you're used to it. That's, I think, what we're actually referring to as day-to-day suffering, the equivalent. And then one other thing, like JD, where you said you don't know how to get someone to hear that when they're in that moment. This would be my advice. And again, this is just a pinch of salt. If anyone's watching this in any stage, watch it again another day, and then watch it again another day, and then watch it again another day. Pick up what you can carry that day. Don't, if you're in that mode where I can't get out of bed, just listen to it to hear that we've been there and we see you and we feel you and we understand. Then the next day you may be in a different place where you're like, I could try journaling, or I've got this thing. What Marco said then, I'll try that. But if you're in the day where you hear that and you're like, fuck that, I can't even do it, cool. Just hear the other things. And that would be my advice, that there's not a one-time thing. You're not an identity of today. You are you. Tomorrow you will be you, but in a different state. You'll hear different things. That would be the only way I could give advice to anyone on this. Just listen to it and hear what you hear and pick up what you can on that day.
That's so important. And also pay attention to what you're resistant to, right? Dave's brought up some things that is very human, right? That animosity, that kind of resistance, whatever it is, we all feel that, right? For me, it was spirituality, right? It was that law of attraction, right? It's like I've seen people that weren't willing to do the work, just like, oh, I'll just manifest it, right? And I was resistant to it. And so I wrote it off. And then I realized that, okay, that's their version of it, but I'm taking it very literal. This is a symbol. You don't need a journal, right? It's what that journal does. It gets the thoughts out of the mind into something else. That can be talking to someone. So it's like, pay attention to what you're resistant to, right? And if you have to write it off that day, write it off that day. But when you come back to it, like they were talking about, right? find the symbolism in it, right? It's not the literal thing. It's not the journaling that's going to save your life, right? It's maybe expressing and getting out of the jungle that is your mind, right? Maybe it's going to hit a heavy bag. It's getting it out of there in a physical realm. Maybe it's just running till you puke, right? Maybe it is going to church. Maybe it's something else, right? Just because you're resistant to the idea of church or journaling or anything like that, what is the symbol? What does it mean? What is it doing, right? And what is your version of that? And start, maybe it's something small. And that exploratory of like, oh, I tried that, that's not it, right? Maybe I'll go jujitsu class and get choked out. Oh, that was something, but it's not quite there, right? I think so often we're like, oh, that's not it, retreat. And it's like, oh, that's not it. Why is it not it? It's because of it. Okay, what's the next thing I can try? And that trial and error, right? Of not, it's hopeless because that didn't work out. It's like I go on a date, it's not a good date. What don't I like? And that's what I'm looking for in a partner. Or what do I like and it didn't work out? How can I take that with me? So it's that data gathering, but pay attention to what you're resistant to, because some of it might be the fight of I don't want to feel good, so going for a walk's not going to make a difference. Okay, well, if it's not going to make a difference, do it anyway, right? Try it. If journaling sucks, prove it, right? Prove that is not your thing, because it's much easier to, it should be very easy to prove that, oh yeah, that didn't work, right? Okay, now what is my version of that? I think that's really really great that Dave keeps bringing that up, of like, it doesn't have to, it's not a literal thing. You don't have to do mixed martial arts or journaling or bike riding, but you got to do something, and you got to try, and you got to experiment, and you got to be willing to be wrong. And you got to remember that the goal is not removing the suffering. It's part of the human experience. It's part of the life experience. It's your co-pilot, right? You have to learn to coexist with that suffering.
Yeah, 100%. We are at time, gentlemen. Wesley, do you have anything to add before we go?
I did want to say one thing to something that Dave brought up earlier. He was saying a lot of the core feeling when you're, you know, in that pit is of shame. There's a lot of that core emotion, and at least for me, a big coping mechanism for that is to overcompensate and to try to prove myself to the world or to myself. And those expectations are what become overwhelming. And, you know, like JD said, he alluded to, you know, your perception isn't always reality. Sometimes you could be in a mental phase or an emotional block that's allowing you to interpret it this way. But suffering is inevitable. But I think we've all also experienced beauty. And I think we've all also experienced, which is why when someone dies that we love, we're sad because we lost something, you know. And just like remembering to not have so many expectations on yourself, and to give yourself grace, and to at least try to realize that you're going to die no matter what. So if you feel like this like insurmountable, I got to do it now, you know, you can always delay it until nature does it for you. And just understand that just the curiosity of being alive and seeing it as an expression of yourself rather than expectations you have to constantly fill your shoes in, and just trying as hard as you can to just extract the good out of things. Because at the end of the day, this is just a roller coaster that we're experiencing, which may or may not have meaning, but nevertheless, there is beauty to be had if you can focus on it and see it and cultivate it, you know. And that, I think a lot of things that JD said at the end there was basically a subconscious sentiment. I could be wrong, but how I interpreted it was to create meaning out of the suffering. Like, you can't negate the suffering, but there can be meaning out of the suffering. And JD always talks about the board of directors and trying to model people that you want to be in life, and like talking about relatability. Like, there's people that tried to kill themselves, like they jumped off the bridge and survived, and now they're actually sharing their story of how they figured it out. And I think that's something also to think about too, is there is hope. You know, I think that's something for me that I didn't really hold on to back then, is like, the sense that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You don't have to know what it is. You don't have to have the existential answer, but just to know that there is hope. That's compelling enough to take action, like Dave said, on a day-to-day basis, just with the belief that someday you can learn to love yourself, or someday you can learn to see goodness in things, even if you don't see it yourself. You don't have to, but the hope, so that's how I would kind of end
I
it
think
there on
that's
my
a
end.
beautiful place to end it. The one thing I will say is there's a chance that none of this helps. You've watched it and it doesn't make you feel any better. I wanted to offer something because I don't have all the answers. Sometimes we don't know who to reach out to, and we don't know what to say. We know the person, we've all invited those doors open, right? One thing that I've done for students, no questions asked, and this is open to anybody who watches this. Whatever it is, I've made it SOS. You message me and you say SOS. That's it. You don't have to explain. You don't have to talk about it, right? SOS. That's an easy thing to get out there. I'll do the rest of the legwork. If you need to vent, if you need to talk about it, if you need me to rant, I can rant for days, right? But I'll figure it out from there. So that is a very simple, you don't have to express it. You don't have to find words for it. You don't have to put the bright side on it, right? You don't have to explain your situation, right? But my DMs are always open, and all you have to put SOS, a symbol, anything, right? And I'll take it from there. And that's open to anybody who watches this at any time. Like I said, I'm not a great sleeper, so UCM students know that if you hit me up late at night, I'm usually there. So at any point, if none of this works, right, and you need that moment, SOS, all you got to do here, hit me up, I'm there.
Right on. Well said. Well done. Thank you. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. This has been wonderful. This has been amazing. And like we've all said, man, this is all our individual takes. Not what works for us might not work for you, and that's okay. Just if you can, keep trying. Like JD said, all right, reach out over here too. Fuck it. Guys, this has been another wonderful episode of The Process, where we get real, raw, and grounded. We definitely did that today. Take care of yourselves. Be well, my friends. Thank you so much.